when I first got here, and I still to this day will find something tucked away in a corner, whether it be a singing sunflower or over by our bamboo shoots ride, we have little bamboo shoots that sing to you and put on a little show every couple minutes. So there's so much charm that has been maintained over the years and has really survived, 70 years of history here.
Tap into innovation at IAAPA Expo, the biggest industry event of the year.
Join us and other attraction pros in Orlando, Florida, November 18th to the 22nd to engage with the global community.
Learn from the experts, leave with new ideas, and turn your passion for the industry into new possibilities.
Register now using the link in the show notes to save up to 30%.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Well, today, Josh, it is going pretty well and fantastically.
Woohoo! Question for you.
Yes.
You like roller coasters, right?
A little bit.
Okay.
Just a smidge.
Before you liked roller coasters, did you not like roller coasters?
I would say I was, to put it mildly, deathly afraid of roller coasters. I would not get on them. I'm sure I've told this story before until I was about 16 years old. Not that I didn't like them. I was afraid to get on them.
Got it. Reason I ask, me too, by the way. Our guest today is Chris Kearsing. He's the general manager at Storyland in northern New Hampshire. And he talks about his storied career, which we're going to talk about, but he talked about being a consumer of the product as well. And that's what got him into the industry. But before he enjoyed riding roller coasters, he shared that the first time he went on them, that he didn't like it, that he talked about riding Super Duper Looper at Hershey Park and didn't like it. And it really got me thinking, because you felt the same way. I felt the same way. I think a lot of people who are coaster enthusiasts feel the same way too. And there's almost something that's coming of age about riding a roller coaster. And that could be one that's more than 500 feet, like Falcon's Flight. Please see episode 362 for more information. Or those that are smaller, like Super Duper Looper, which is not one of the biggest ones in the world anymore, but something that looks intimidating. And it's almost like, and maybe in the early years, whether you're a child or a teenager, you're supposed to not like it, but you're supposed to want to do it. And when you do it, you realize you like it. And that's, I mean, we could go really, really deep into this, but I just, I found it interesting. He mentioned that briefly in the interview, in the conversation that we have. And I think that is how a lot of people, whether they're working in the industry or whether they are just very big fans of the industry, one of the reasons why they love it so much is because they got over that hump, both figuratively and literally, and they got on it and they hated it until they loved it, and then they loved it and they could never go back.
Well, I do believe it's, I don't know if this is the right word, but kind of having an epiphany, so to speak, because, in Chris's case, he talked about, like you said, not liking them for a long time. And then, we didn't really get into the weeds about that process of, how long did it take, for you to really like them and to really enjoy them. But I do wonder, like, what would happen if he never rode one again? If he got on the Super Duper Looper with his dad and rode it and hated it and never got on one again, what would have happened?
Then his career path would probably go something similar to how he asked or answered one of the last questions that we asked him, which means that you need to listen to the entire interview.
That's right.
what that could look like. So Chris Kearsing, general manager at Storyland in New Hampshire. He's been in the industry for many, many, many years. It's his first season at Storyland, but he walks us through what he describes as being a storied career. And I'm not going to argue with that based on the stories that he told us.
You know, I thought I moved around a lot and had a number of different jobs before starting my own business in 2011, but I'm nothing compared to his, or I should say my story is nothing compared to his in terms of all the different places that he's been able to go. Truly a storied career. But one of the things that he talks a lot about, and that it was kind of a through line to all the different positions he's been in, is that willingness to say yes. To say yes to a new opportunity, to say yes to, a new project, or, something where you're going to expand your horizons and get new experience. And, you think about where he is right now as the general manager, he really has to have a lot of different experience across the entire park. And so you don't get to that position without having your hand in a lot of different parts of the park and having an understanding of those different things and how they all fit together. And of course, if you rewind that a little bit further, you don't get that without saying yes.
Exactly. And also, we talk about Storyland itself. As at the time of this recording, we're here in 2024. They're celebrating 70 years. So we get to hear what the park is doing to honor that anniversary, while at the same time maintaining the charm. And like you've mentioned, or you mentioned in the interview, when we talk to people from historic parks, we generally like to get into this conversation of how are you moving into the future while still honoring the past, but making sure that there is that balance. And Chris walks us through how they're balancing that and talks about many specific initiatives that they've put in place to be able to make some changes, but also explain why they're making the changes, but also the things that are still very traditional in the park as well.
So should we go ahead and get our mat and our milk and cookies for story time with Chris?
Let's do it.
Hey, Chris, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
Hi, Matt. Hi, Josh. I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. We are super excited to jump into this conversation. So first of all, let's start for people who might not know you and talk a little bit about your history in the industry and your background. So can you kind of give us a rundown of that?
Yeah, it's been a very storied career, as I would say. So, born and raised in upstate New York, just east of Lake George. So I got my start in the industry at the Great Escape in Splashwater Kingdom, as it was called then. Just started, the year after, or the summer after I graduated from high school, took a ride operator job, and then kind of kept coming back each summer while I was in college. So worked my way up the ranks, became a ride supervisor, and then training assistant manager type seasonal role. Then I had the really good fortune 2 weeks after I graduated from college, and I was a December graduate, a full-time job became available at the Great Escape in operations, and it was aquatics, guest services, and entertainment. So it was kind of a multifaceted role. So did that for a couple of years, and then responsibilities switched a little bit. I became operations manager, where I oversaw rides in the water park. And actually, when I started full time, that was an exciting time because we had just opened the Six Flags Great Escape Lodge and indoor water park. So that was way back in 2006, and got to be on that opening team, which was great. And then later on, got recruited to go to Elitch Gardens, and the park had sold by that point. It was managed by Park Management and owned by C&L. So I was the director of operations there for 5 years. So, and during that time had gone through a couple different management changes. So started under Park Management, and then for 3 years there in the middle, Hershin Family Entertainment was the managing partner. And then later after that was Premier Parks. So kind of, got to know a lot of people in the industry through that experience, which is great. So 5 years there. And then someone I knew from the park management days was connected to a board member at Holiday World and Splashin Safari. And at that time, they were kind of going through a generational shift. So the fourth generation was taking over, and, they were kind of looking for some outside influence and some other folks to join their organization. So Everyone Loves Holiday World. It's a great park, great organization. So when that opportunity came up, I was hired as the vice president of operations, where I oversaw all the operating departments plus the in-park revenue. And that's why it was a really compelling opportunity for me, because I got to learn the food and beverage, retail, and game side of the business, which was a great experience for me. So, and that was also when the park had just announced, or was about to announce, Thunderbird. So I got to work on the Thunderbird project, which was awesome. So I did that for 3 years. Wanted to be back in the Northeast, and had the opportunity to take over Fantasy Island. So it was the Apex Parks group at the time, Al Weber's group back then. So they had just acquired Martin's Fantasy Island and Grand Island, New York, earlier that year. So right between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. So I thought that was a great opportunity to get back in the Northeast. Did that all the way through COVID. And then actually that park and several others were kind of closed permanently with that operating group. Apex went through some changes during then. And, I stayed on as we closed the park. It's since reopened under another ownership group, which is great. But so kind of became a little bit of a COVID casualty, and stepped away from the industry just briefly that summer, and was working with a sightseeing tour operator out of Niagara Falls, and did that for the summer. And then my friends at Six Flags Darien Lake had an opportunity available. So being in Western New York there, I decided to kind of go back to Six Flags. And that role was a little bit different too. It was director of administration. So it was human resources and public safety. So that was a really great experience too, to kind of do something a little bit different than what I've done typically in operations before. So did that the year the park reopened from COVID, which was exciting to be a part of that. And then had the opportunity. They asked me to go to Six Flags Over Texas, and so this would have been. This is where the journey gets very exciting, right? So went to Dallas for a year as the director of operations, and then we all know Six Flags went through a lot of changes, has gone through changes with the merger. So my role and several other roles there actually were eliminated last summer, and that same day that change was made, I stayed on another 3 weeks to kind of help transition. Got a call about Adventureland, where you and I connected last summer. So there was a director of operations position available there. And, and actually, I remember, I believe you did a podcast with Bill a while back about that transition from family ownership into Palace. So I was always kind of intrigued by what they were doing there, and kind of started the conversation when he was there, and finished it with Mike Lusky, who's there now, and came on board as the ops director. It was July 3rd of last year, which was, that's such a charming, awesome park, and that was a great experience. But sometimes when you've had opportunities, you get more opportunities, because if you're willing to say yes to things, those opportunities tend to keep coming. So Palace at the time was looking for a general manager here at Storyland and Living Shores Aquarium, and had only been in Des Moines for about 6 months, didn't really have any ties there. And being so close to my extended family here, about 3.5 hours away from upstate New York where they live, I thought, again, great opportunity to be back in the Northeast, and accepted this position and got boots on the ground here in February. So like I said, kind of a storied journey to get here.
That is definitely a storied journey. And thank you so much for walking us through that. We always love hearing the career paths that people take, and no two career paths are the same. And I think that you definitely proved that point very much, and it was really interesting to walk through that. You mentioned the interview we did with Bill Lentz. That was episode 265. So almost exactly 100 episodes ago, coincidentally here. Chris, I'm curious, going back to the very beginning, you said that first job out of high school at the Great Escape. Why'd you take the job? Were you a consumer of the product? Were you regularly visiting the park? What got you interested in joining the industry in the first place? I know I'm kind of hitting rewind and going all the way back to the beginning. but curious as far as what then led to, I would say, that chain reaction to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely was a user of the product. In fact, my first season pass is here hanging on my bulletin board from, way back in the late 90s when Premier acquired the park and started rapidly expanding. So, growing up in the Northeast is a great place to be a theme park fan. So, our family, we always went on theme park family vacations, right? So you have so many parks in that area. And, one of the first experiences I remember was being 9 years old and being at Hershey Park and riding the Super Duper Looper with my father and just absolutely hating it and just crying and not enjoying it at all. And the Comet and the Trailblazer at the time, but later actually grew to really enjoy it. And then, each year we'd go camping at Darien Lake because that really, was only a few hours from where we lived. And of course, the Great Escape. And then we would go to Riverside at the time before it was branded to Six Flags New England. And we had family that was in Freehold, New Jersey. So we would go down to Six Flags Great Adventure once a year. So it always kind of grew up visiting the parks, not necessarily enjoying them at first, and then later growing to appreciate them. But when I graduated high school, in the summertime, I used to do things like mow lawns and, just keep busy to make money. And, theme parks hire a lot of people in the summer, and it's a great job for high school students and college students. So took the opportunity to be a ride operator to make some money before my first semester of college. And I actually distinctly remember thinking how fortunate I was to be able to go to college so I didn't have to do that type of entry level position the rest of my career, right? Not ever knowing that one experience would turn into 24 years later, right, to where I am now.
So Chris, again, storied is a great term to use for your career to this point. And I say to this point because I'm sure there's a lot more ahead of you. But I'm curious, in all those different positions and different transitions and things like that, what would you say was some of the things that you kept with you kind of going from position to position, maybe your philosophy or the way that you kind of operated that may not change even if you go from different company to different company?
Yeah, I'd say one philosophy is, say yes, right? Or if you have to say no to something, have a really good reason. I think, sometimes people get stuck in routines and, it's we've always done it this way type mentality. So I like to think that I brought kind of a broad perspective, having some experience at other locations. And when presented with a opportunity or a challenge, figure out a way to get things done versus automatically saying no. I think it's important, for example, working in operations, that you build great relationships with marketing and sales, right? I always say their job is to bring guests to the door. It's our job to take care of them once they get there. But, of course, within the limits of safety, I always like to listen to their publicity ideas and ideas for events and for earned media opportunities and say, yeah, we can do that. Yes, we can open the coaster at 5 o'clock in the morning for whoever. Or, yeah, we can, stay late and do this. And that's just one philosophy is, try to get to yes and try to build those relationships that better the business overall.
So Chris, let's talk a little bit about Storyland. You've been there since the beginning of this year. For those who've never been there before, can you describe the park? Can you give us a virtual walkthrough? I would say, what's the experience like?
Yeah, Storyland is extremely charming, and we're nestled right here in the middle of the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and we're surrounded by just such natural beauty. And we're definitely I want to say kids park, but really family park. Our target audience really is 2 to 12. And this is a park that's not just about rides. We actually only have 14 mechanical rides plus 4 other what I call experiential rides, like Cinderella's Castle and the Swan Boats and the pirate ship, which is not a swinging ship, but an actual ride, in the water on an actual boat. So the other thing that's super charming about Storyland is all the animatronics that are kind of scattered throughout the park. So a lot of these, whether it's a show, whether it's a themed element or a decoration, these were all homemade by people who worked here. And we have what we call the magic shop up in our maintenance area. And it's this great shop that they can maintain these animatronics that are pretty old, have been here for a while, but people look forward to seeing it. You know, one of my favorite, I actually, when I first got here, and I still to this day will find something tucked away in a corner, whether it be a singing sunflower or over by our bamboo shoots ride, we have little bamboo shoots that sing to you and put on a little show every couple minutes. So there's so much charm that has been maintained over the years and has really survived, 70 years of history here. So it's an overall experience that is kind of laced in with also costume characters, interactive meet and greets with Cinderella, and also our costume characters Duke and Rory. So it's not any one thing that makes the park so special. It's this combination of natural beauty, really great attractions that the whole family can ride together. So we don't have any rides here that have maximum height requirements. That's great for a family park. So you can ride everything together. And then the highest height requirement we do have in the park is 42 inches. So we're pretty inclusive and pretty accessible. But, you could spend all day not even riding a ride if you didn't want to, because there's just so much to see and explore.
So, Chris, you mentioned being up in this area with all this natural beauty, and I've been up to that area. I used to live in southern New Hampshire, and just amazing up there in the White Mountains. But it's also really known for the winter destinations and skiing and all those winter sports and things of that nature. So, how would you describe kind of that summer winter mix of the tourist opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm learning a lot. So the town itself, the area is busy year round. So in the winter, it's all about skiing, right? So all the hotels, all the Airbnbs, the second homes, those are all filled with people who want to enjoy the ski resorts that are nearby. And in the summertime, it's all about outdoor recreation. So kayaking, tubing on the river, hiking, and all the activities that are here. Plus, and we're part of the White Mountains Attractions Association. So there's a lot of attractions that are within this White Mountain region, and they all support each other through shared marketing efforts. So there's a lot of just other attractions that aren't theme parks as well, that you can visit year round here. So what I've learned, I've had to kind of reprogram how I think. So most of the parks where I've worked, it's all about season pass, right? Season pass is the bread and butter, and you try to sell as many units and you try to upsell, and that's really not the case here. So while season pass is an important part of our business, it's a much smaller part comparatively than what I'm used to. So I've really had to retrain myself and think more about single day ticket sales strategies and 2-day tickets, and how to really just get the most out of the tourists who are in this area, because a large percentage of our visitation is tourism driven. The local population, so right here in Conway, North Conway, it's about 12,500 people. So, it's a very small local population. And then if you go north, there's the Gorham Berlin population area too, which is about, again, 11,000 people. So we really truly rely on tourism for visitation. And from a staffing standpoint, it becomes very interesting, because while there's not a lot of people who live here, there's a ton to do. So there's a lot of restaurants and hotels and shopping centers, and we're all kind of competing for that same employee, the entry level retail oriented hospitality positions. But yeah, it's definitely a year round destination.
That's really interesting, particularly the point about season passes versus single day tickets, because there simply isn't the geographic market that would justify focusing so substantially on season passes. I am curious, with being in an area with a smaller residential population, what are ways that you're able to embrace the local community and really embed yourselves with those who are there? I'm guessing staffing and recruitment is probably a huge part of it, but for those who maybe they do live there year round and probably have generational loyalty to the park. So curious as far as what that integration with the locals is like.
Absolutely. When we start our season, we start with a preview day before we open to the general public. And it's a season pass preview, but it also, we give out single day tickets, complimentary tickets to community partners. And that allows us to kind of do a white glove dress rehearsal before we open to the general public. So that's one thing that the community embraces. And then Living Shores Aquarium, we're open year round. So that's a great activity. We do things like local day promotions. So we have certain days set aside throughout the operating season where locals can get a discount, not pay the same gate price or ticket price that a tourist would pay, as an opportunity to enjoy the local attractions.
So, Chris, I'm curious if we could rewind just a little bit. You started there, at Storyland and the aquarium. What were some of the first sort of initiatives maybe that you had, or things that you had in your mind of, here are some things that I think we can do to really, up the game in terms of whether it's service or productivity or efficiency and that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the very first thing I think is just to learn, right? You step into a position and you have to observe and learn, and you have to kind of learn to know where to hover and know where to dive deep, right? Where you're looking at processes and procedures and people, and take the best of what really works and then fine tune the things that could use improvement. My first focus when I got here was staffing. So this again is a park that historically, and especially post COVID, has struggled to hit its staffing numbers each year. So that was, talking to the team here and talking even before I started, I knew that that was going to be a big challenge. So we have the great benefit of owning really nice employee housing. So there's a motel that was on site for years that was acquired by the previous owner. And then there's a bunch of other buildings that have been added or repurposed. So we took our international student program, our J1 visa program, from about 60 to 65 participants to 117 this year. And that got us exactly where we need to be. I even argue that we may be slightly overstaffed this summer. So we kind of took that one roadblock away. And what's that done is, it's really improved our NPS, our Net Promoter Score, because we have all the attractions available. We don't have staffing downtime. And the other thing it's done is really improved our profitability for in-park spending. So even though we're using more labor and have a higher seasonal labor expense than we may have in previous years, we're also getting a lot more on the spending side, and it's more profitable. That those operations are more profitable because we are staffed. So that was a really big focus when I first got here, and working with our we call it P&O, people and organization team, to make sure that we were working with all the right agencies. And we had we did do Moo Lagoon, the water attraction, was our big significant capital investment this year, but we also did a pretty big investment in that housing so we could get more beds so we could accomplish this task of getting the park staff. So that was a really big push. And then as we got closer to the spring, I really focused with the team heavily on just physical appearance of the park, landscaping, painting, because we didn't want guests to show up and say, geez, it looks 70 years old, right? We wanted to look fresh. And I think a lot of parks went through post-COVID, kind of struggled a little bit with some deferred maintenance when we weren't spending during that time. So there was a pretty big concentrated effort from our whole team to really do some nice landscaping and really paint some buildings that needed work and do some refresh on the attractions. So those were my priorities when I first got here.
What's the response been like to that refresh, the landscaping, the maintenance, the painting, all of those?
We've got a lot of credit for it. I think it's things that you don't necessarily, guests may not notice when it's really nice, or they'll comment on it, but they'll notice when it's wrong. So, we have received some compliments about just the cleanliness of the park and the park appearance. So we're going to continue these projects. And again, now that we're staffed in a much better spot, it's a lot easier to maintain than I think it has been in previous years. So definitely some positive response from those efforts. And our team has just done a great job of taking that initiative and running with it.
So Chris, one of the things I'm curious about that we talked to quite a few leaders of historic attractions about, in terms of balancing the fact that you've been open for 70 years. You haven't been there, although your storied career might say otherwise. The park has been open for 70 years. You said a minute ago, which I totally appreciate, you don't want it to look like it's 70 years old, but you also said earlier there's some animatronics and things that people definitely want to come back to and see every year. So there's a nostalgic piece of it. At the same time, you've got a responsibility to continue to improve things so that people want to come back and there's something new to see and things like that. So I guess the question is, how do you balance recognizing and respecting the 70-year history, but then also figuring out how do we take this to the next step?
Yeah, it is a balancing act for sure. And I've also learned a lot just about what people appreciate here. So I think you have to maintain the best of what works and what people remember and they want to see here, while also refreshing. So the Moo Lagoon project, which opened in early June this year, is a good example. So it's a new water attraction. It really is a mini water park, right? So it has a play structure with a tipping bucket, 50 plus toys that will get you wet, that will spray, and then a slide tower that has 3 body slides off of it. And then the structure itself has 5 smaller slides off of it. That replaced a smaller spray area that I think was probably underutilized, but it's right in the heart of the park. So, and it does get hot here in the summer. So, we replaced something that probably wasn't a legacy attraction. It was just a means to get wet in the summer. And we replaced it with something that looks incredible, that people have really embraced. So we provided an upgrade while also just maintaining all the legacy attractions as well. And if you look at, again, this isn't a ride heavy park. So, over the course of time, attractions have been added, rides have been added, but there has been a concentrated effort to maintain the buildings as they look and maintain, like I said, the animatronic figures and even just the storybook area buildings. Speaking of Storytown, it's actually, again, kind of full circle. So in 1954, when this park opened, it was called Storytown, not Storyland. And that's the same year that Charlie Wood's Storytown opened in Lake George. And so in order to avoid confusion, the second year, this park changed its name to Storyland. So the first year is actually called Storytown, which is kind of cool, kind of a full circle moment, since, of course, the Storytown later became the Great Escape. But, going back to your question about legacy versus new, here's a good example of a change that we made this year that was probably pretty controversial, but ended up working out okay. So for most of the time here, part of the storybook section had barnyard animals as kind of just an exhibit. And over time, we're in the middle of the White Mountains and there's wildlife all around, and we just couldn't guarantee the animal safety. And I think, just sometimes those attractions get a little tired and they're a little bit too small for what we're trying to do. So actually the decision was made before I even arrived here, but it was a good decision to retire the actual live animals. And we repurposed a lot of the exhibits. And now we have some 3D cutouts of the animals that used to be there. And we've certainly had comments that it's not the same as in the past. But when you explain the reason that the change was made, people understand. And, I think they appreciate that the area still looks similar. And that could be somewhere that's, prime for redevelopment in the future. Another change that was made this year was with parking. So, recognizing that we made a historic capital investment in the park that we're trying to, of course, we want to see a return on. We started offering what we're calling preferred parking. It's actually the second time the park has done it. So pre-COVID, when we still accepted cash as a form of payment, the spots that were closest to the front gate were kind of reserved for preferred parking guests, and it was just a cash transaction. And then that kind of went away when cash went away. So we brought that back, and we still offer free parking across the street, and there's a tunnel to get back and forth, kind of like Kennywood. So, free parking is always available, but the parking on the park side of the street is now a preferred parking spot that comes with a charge. So a little bit of a change, but really hasn't been rejected by our guests, right? I think, and when we think about our guests, I kind of think of them in three different buckets. The majority of our guests are tourists that come from like the Boston area or even from New York City. And they're probably used to paying for parking everywhere they go. So they don't bat an eye. And then you have the season pass holders, right? And parking is a benefit that's included with their season pass, so it doesn't really impact them. Then you kind of have the once a year multi-generational guests who may not be used to that change, but so far, like I said, it really hasn't been there hasn't been much pushback on that. So it really does take a balancing act to generate incremental new revenue streams while also preserving the past.
That's really interesting to hear all those different initiatives that kind of when they add up, they I would say bring the park into the future, while to your point of really respecting and honoring the past and traditions and everything that people have grown up with or have come to know and love with the park. One other thing too is we're recording this in early August 2024, and you are in your longest season ever with your Halloween event. So curious if you can tell us a little about Happy Hauntings as well.
Yeah, we're really excited about Happy Hauntings because, like you said, it's going to extend the season past Columbus Day, which we haven't done before. And it offers a whole new experience for our guests. It's another reason for a season pass holder to visit. So it's all family friendly, kid focused. It's very similar to the offerings we have at Dutch Wonderland and Idlewild. So we're going to be doing things like a trick or treat trail with themed costume characters, the storybook characters. So Little Red Riding Hood and the Old Mother in the Shoe. So we're going to introduce some of those characters are here anyway, but we're going to put them on our trick or treat trail. And then we're going to do things like a hay maze, and we're going to redo our Daniel Tiger show, Daniel Tiger show will run concurrently with a new show that we're doing in that theater. And I want to say we ordered like 600 mums and 800 bales of hay and corn stalks. So we're really going to play up the theming element of it as well. And we're also introducing an IP called Spookly. So Spookly is a square pumpkin where, of course, all of his friends are, round. So it's a diversity and inclusive message too, which is pretty cool and really on brand with us. So it's going to be an overall event with, of course, our legacy attractions, plus our costume character interactions, new shows, and, theming and other attractions as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And I think it's really cool to hear how you're using some new IP and, so many of the things and kind of really fit into that on-brand statement that you used. When you're talking about the kind of haunt that you're going to do, it's not going to be a Halloween Horror Nights at like at Universal, right? I mean, you're really taking this opportunity to extend the season and do this event that's really, really on brand. And I guess that also gets me to another question, thinking about your career, because there have been so many different brands that you've worked with and different ways of kind of approaching that. Do you find that now being in a park that is primarily for families and for the younger children, that your philosophy toward park operations has changed at all? Or is it just a different demographic that you've worked with before, but just now this is your main demographic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely have had to change philosophy. I think, operating a park, the tenets of what make a operation great remain the same, right? It has to be friendly, it has to be clean, it has to be efficient. You have to look for those areas that could frustrate a visitor and work to improve, right? But I've usually worked in ride heavy parks or water parks, big water parks, and my biggest learning here was that, again, it's not just about the rides, it's about the overall experience. And that's really important in a park that's geared toward children. So my nephew will turn 5 at the end of this month, and he's coming up this weekend for the first time. And I really can't wait to spend some time in the park with him and just see that experience through his eyes, because when you're out there walking the midways, you see so many families having a really good time. And I think it's just it's so telling when you see what the kids want to do. And sometimes it's not a ride, or it's not what you think it is, or it's not the show. It's, it's some character or prop, or even we have a gift shop called Let's Pretend, which has been there for a long time. And our guests can go in there and purchase costumes and dress up. And there's a little stage in there where they can look at themselves in the mirror. So you just never know, I think, with that age group, what actually gets them excited. So I have had to rethink about the overall experience, although I do, like I said, kind of the main tenets of what make a park great remain.
What do you want your nephew to be looking out for when he's in the park, and what questions do you anticipate asking him after?
Yeah, so I know he really loves trains. So I know he's going to want to ride the train, and he's probably, he'll want to know how it works and what powers it. But, I think the question, what I'm going to look for is, again, what gets him excited? Is it the slush factory? Is it the costume character? Is it meeting Cinderella or hugging one of our costume characters? Is it the wooden roller coaster? And I know he's going to really enjoy the water play area. It's just such a great family attraction. So I'm sure the rest of my family will be in the seats while he's enjoying getting wet and sprayed. So yeah, I kind of just want to understand what about the experience is the most compelling.
And Chris, I would imagine that there's a lot of adult team members at Storyland that have young children, and they are a great resource for that kind of input. Do you ever get suggestions or thoughts from the parents to say, hey, my kid came here and this is what happened, and we'd really like to see this or that, and just using that as an avenue for input?
Yeah, and I think we could probably even do a better job of soliciting that input from our team members and even our guests. I think sometimes in an organization, we all know communication can be a challenge, right? But it's like we want that feedback from our team members who have worked here for a long time, who's kind of seen different iterations of the park, different ownership groups, different managers, and just really understand their thoughts about it and what works. And so on my to-do list for sure is to kind of formalize a way to provide that feedback so that we can make sure the experience is great. I mean, a good example is, I remember my father one time being in one of the parks and being like, hey, you should really build a table right here, because when I'm trying to open my locker, I don't have a place. I'm trying to hold my bags and put everything. So if you had like a table over here, it would make a big difference. And like, yeah, that's a great suggestion. When we're walking through the park every day and seeing it through our lens, we don't necessarily see it as a user. So getting that feedback from our team members who have family who use it more frequently is always really valuable.
How do you foster that type of culture in your team to be on the lookout for that type of feedback that might be there in the moment? Maybe it's a little less formalized, maybe less documented, but of those observations of, oh, there should be a table right here. And it's not something that I would have thought of because I'm looking at it through the lens of the operator rather than through the lens of the guest. But if we do this, then it will improve the experience, even if we can't necessarily see and feel it.
Yeah, so I think one avenue for that is our manager on duty program, right? So we always have someone who's responsible for what I call like a quality control audit each day. So before we open and throughout the operating day. And I think it's great to get all levels of the team involved in that, because a retail manager might have a different perspective than an operations manager, than someone who works in maintenance, right? So getting the team engaged in park operations, even if it's one shift every 10 days or every 2 weeks, it kind of naturally solicits that feedback, because they have to report back at the end of the day their observations. And those observations really just don't go into an inbox. They do get read, and they do and actually those reports get shared with our broader corporate team too. So sometimes I'll get questions about something that's in a report, and it makes me think about how we can make an improvement to a process, or how we can put a process in place that is like a guardrail to make sure that that quality is there. So the other way is, you know, we like to meet with the folks who actually are seeing things day in and day out. So right now we're knee deep in our 2025 capital planning and, you know, starting the budget prep. So, you know, I have my priorities, but they may be a little bit different than the maintenance mechanic who has their hands on the equipment every single morning. So we've made a concentrated effort to get that, you know, all the way down to the line level engaged with the process so that we're making the best decisions on behalf of the facility. So I think it's really important to solicit that feedback from all departments and all levels of the organization.
You know, Chris, one of the things we're really curious about that you've kind of already answered a little bit when we were going to ask about the advice that you would give to someone, and it sounds like saying yes would be a big part of that. So I'm curious, what advice have you gotten that you've, you know, incorporated into your leadership style?
Yeah, I've gotten advice over the year, you know, raise your hand, even if you don't really want to do something. So I think one of the great benefits of my career has been starting at a smaller park. So, you know, the Great Escape, it's a great park, but in operations, you know, we were a smaller team then, and you really had to do a little bit of everything. So I got to learn admissions, I got to learn park services, I got to learn aquatics and entertainment when I was just in those seasonal roles. So that really kind of made me marketable, right? When full-time roles became available. I remember, you know, we had a petting zoo, and sometimes you just had to get involved and clean the pens and, you know, just do the things that other people don't necessarily raise their hand to do, you know. So that was advice I was given early on is, and, you know, I've had opportunities, and some I've said no to some opportunities, but I've probably said yes more than no. And I realized that, like, I don't have children, so I can probably be a lot more flexible than some people can be. But if you do have flexibility in your life, then say yes to the opportunities that compel you, because you never know what the next one's going to be. But yeah, I mean, I'd say the advice that I have received is to raise your hand.
It's good advice. So Chris, we're coming up towards the end of the interview, starting to wind down here. But going now kind of way back to the beginning here. So really sort of bringing things full circle. And I know I asked what got you into the industry to begin with, and I'm going to ask kind of a similar question is, if you weren't in the industry, what do you think you'd be doing?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that. And I'm really not sure. You know, I did step away that one time, and it was kind of, I'd call it industry adjacent, because we were in the sightseeing tour business and it was still about hospitality. It didn't feel the same as the themed entertainment and theme park world, but I think as I think about my skill set and about things that kind of interest me, I would say maybe accounting or maybe even law, right? So I like to get really analytical and really into the data, into the numbers that drive our business, and really look at trends and kind of use that to make decisions on behalf of the business. So I could see myself going that route, or like I said, law is kind of interesting, but I really did miss it the one time I did step away. So it kind of just gets in your blood. And what I really like about it is I can kind of, you know, my day is different, can be different every day, right? There's some days I do have to be in the office and be on calls and, you know, send spreadsheets and reports. But when I don't want to do that, I can just open my door and go out into the park and watch people have a good time, interact with our team members. And I like that variety.
And I think that's one thing that we hear from a lot of leaders in the industry is that, yes, there's a lot of administrative work, but what really keeps me grounded and keeps me inspired is to go out and watch people having a good time, listen to the screams on the roller coasters and the smiles and the laughing and people eating cotton candy and all those different things that people get to do in our industry, that you could just be a spectator and almost get the same kind of feeling of joy and excitement from that.
Absolutely. It really helps energize you. It energizes me when I'm out in the park, and when I make my rounds, I use my camera on my phone as my notepad, right? So if I see something that I think we can improve upon, or we want to change, or maybe we need a sign here, I'll take a bunch of pictures and I'll come back into the office, sort through them, and then either submit work orders or work with our team on what they think about suggestions. So there's never a time I go into the park that I don't come back with a bunch of pictures, and or for positive reinforcement purposes too, because there's a lot of great out there, and it's awesome to share that.
That's awesome. Chris, this has been such a fascinating conversation. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. As we start to wind this down here, if people want to learn more about Storyland, or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Sure. Yeah. So if you want to learn more about Storyland, our website, storylandnh.com, you'll find a lot of information there. We're very active on social as well. We have some great content out there. But if you want to get a hold of me, LinkedIn is great. It's a little bit difficult in the summertime, but I try to maintain a pretty active LinkedIn presence. And I like to share some of the things that we're doing at the park there. So I love connecting with folks in the industry and making those connections.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris. And we really appreciate the time that you've been able to spend with us today. And I'll kind of give the shout out, if anybody is up in kind of northern New Hampshire, go check Chris out at Storyland. So everybody, thank you for your time today here on the Attraction Pros podcast. And just remember, we are all Attraction Pros.